So the next few slides are just examples of supply and demand curves and the way they interplay with each other. And this one is an example of demand curve. That's me as the person doing the buying, the buyer. I will demand for a price of $5. I won't pay more than $5 when there's 100 million tons available. When there's a lot more available, I want to pay less. So for me, um, the minimum I would pay is based on a certain number that's available, and the maximum I will pay is based on a certain number available. And the goal, of course, is where does what I want match up with where what the supplier wants, and that's what the next slide will show us, at least what the supplier wants. So here's the play for the supply curve, and for the person who is supplying the product. When there's few products out there, then the price per basket is going to be significantly lower. And as the price per basket goes up, more and more people enter the market, so there's more and more available, because as the price goes up, more is available. But at the end of the day, that equilibrium point isn't just based on what the seller wants to sell it for, it's also what the buyer wants to buy it for. And so the next page will deal with where that equilibrium point plays out. And so here is where the equilibrium point falls. When there is a certain demand for product, which we see in the lower right-hand corner, and then a certain supply of the product in the lower left-hand corner, there's going to be a shortage. There's a demand for the product at a certain price, and no one is going to have enough product out there to sell it at that low price. We want it at that low price, but we're not going to get it. So there's always going to be a shortage at that price. And if you go up to the upper right-hand corner where the supply line is, at a certain rate of production, when the supply is high, we want a demand price at a certain level, and the demand is significantly lower at that price because nobody wants to buy it at that price, then we're dealing with a surplus. And so when demand exceeds the supply, there's profit. When the supply exceeds the demand, then there's loss for the company. And the goal is to figure out where that little sweet spot is there in the middle for that equilibrium point, so that we're buying and selling product at a rate. You're willing to sell at a certain rate, I'm willing to buy at a certain rate. It's the most I'm willing to spend for it, and it's the least you're willing to sell it for. And we look for that equilibrium right there. So let's now talk about monopoly. So what we were discussing before, as I said, is perfect competition. And perfect competition, while it's something we strive for, is rare to find. Monopolistic competition is where the seller controls the market, and typically it's a seller. And they are the only ones selling the product. They can control the supply, they can control the price. You either buy it or you're out of luck. And in a monopolistic situation, we don't have options out there. That's not considered ethical. It's not considered fair for people. And it doesn't certainly meet the standards of ethics of care, if you think about it that way, if we're building relationships. But let's dive into this a little bit. What happens when a free market ceases to be perfectly competitive? And basically, the monopoly market emerges where one dominant situation controls everything, or almost everything out there. Typically, it's usually a monopoly is usually one person dominating the market, and anybody else there is not even a viable competitor. Nobody buys their product ever. Kind of like Microsoft. There are other people doing software, but nobody buys it. And so as we dive into monopoly control and profit, right? How does monopoly control and profit work? In that situation, the seller controls the quantity and the price of its products on the market. So I decide how much I want to sell, what the price is going to be, period. The seller can either extract profit by producing less than the equilibrium quantity and setting the price below the demand curve but high above the supply. And that's how they extract the profitability. High entry barriers, keeping other competitors from bringing more products to the marketplace, are the way that they make sure there's very little competition out there. So we push other people out. We create these high barriers so that other people cannot get in there. But really our goal is to extract as much profit as possible by making sure that the demand is that the price is below the demand curve but high above the price, high above the supply curve. So our monopolies or monopolists, are they utility maximizers? Without external controls like government regulations and things like that, monopolists will do what all companies do, which was they will maximize profit. So they are maximizing profit for themselves, but it's not a mutual utility. I am not getting my greatest utility as the buyer, but the monopolist is definitely getting their utility as the seller. So here's an example of how that supply and demand curve works in a monopoly situation. The monopoly decides what the price is going to be and what the quantity is, and it's set, and it wants to set it so it's everything to the left of that equilibrium point, which, as you'll see on this chart, is about 400 quantity at about $2 a basket for the potatoes. That's what these were potato examples we were using before. And the goal for them in order to maximize their profit is they want everything to be on the left-hand side of this as much as possible. And given they're a monopoly, they can do that. There's no pressure, that's going to put them, increasing the quantity over the amount that's demanded so that they would actually lose money. There's no incentive for them to do that because there's no other competition out there. So they get to control the quantity and the profit because they are creating an artificial demand by being the only people out there providing the product or service. Is a business monopoly incompatible with moral values? An unregulated market controlled by a monopoly would seek to maximize profits even if it created a problem for buyers. So by definition, it is not respecting the buyers. It is not building a relationship with them. It is not treating them with dignity and fairness. So yes, it would be incompatible with moral values because it's burdensome. It also violates capitalistic justice by charging more than a product is worth. So, and it's a product's worth is based on how much the buyer wants to sell it at, as well as taking into account the cost of goods and labor to create the product and a reasonable profit margin for people on that. So it violates capitalistic justice because it's not taking into account what the buyer is interested in. And it deviates from the basics of economic utility because it manipulates shortages and removes incentives to be efficient when it's doing that. So it really violates the negative rights of our by keeping competitors out of the marketplace. It controls all of the market in terms of supply, in terms of demand, in terms of pricing, and therefore it really is incompatible with moral justice and moral rights. Let's move on now to oligopolistic competition. And in oligopolistic competition, it differs from perfect competition and monopolistic competition in that it only has a handful of significant sellers, not open number of sellers where everybody can enter and exit the market as they want to. And it's not one single person, but it is a small group of sellers that control the basic market. And And the goal is that they increase the barriers to entry to make it as difficult as possible for competitors to get in there. There are highly concentrated markets. An oligopoly market is highly concentrated, meaning there's very few people, very few organizations rather, that are engaged in this. And so because there's so few organizations, there's only a few large ones that control the stuff going on in terms of the marketplace. How are they formed? Well, basically through horizontal mergers. When companies merge, we take two smaller businesses and we merge them together to become a large, dominant part of the marketplace. And so mergers and acquisitions are not necessarily problematic unless they create an oligopolistic context, in which case then there is less competition. If we see sort of rapid consolidation and rapid mergers, we see less competition, and that harsh lack of competition makes things worse for the buyers. So how do they form? As we said, through the horizontal mergers. What are the ultimately effects? When we talk about it hurting the consumers don't get fair prices, meaning the prices are still going to be higher than they should be. There is a decline in social utility, meaning that there is no consideration, right, for what I need. It's only concerned about what the oligopolists need. And the basic economic freedoms are being disrespected, that I don't get to choose who I want to buy from anymore. When the market is tightened up like that, and people buy up other corporations, we start to see our options become less and less and things become more homogenized. This graphic is from the textbook, and it's from page 181 on the edge, fixing the computer memory market storyline. It's on that page. And this is a graphic that expresses how the DRAM, or the dynamic random access memory prices, fluctuated. And what we found is, of course, these prices during recessions, prices were going down. And so what we started to see, though, is that price fluctuation was really a reaction to the major players in the market, which were Micron, Infineon, Samsung, Hynix, and a few others, who were collaborating and colluding on controlling the prices and controlling supply. And basically everybody followed what Micron did. And as Micron raised and lowers prices, everybody else did the same thing. So Infineon pled guilty to participating in meetings and communications with others to fix prices and to address what they thought was how they could control in a collaborative manner what was going on in terms of the pricing. So an oligopoly is where there are major players. Not only there's a handful of major players where there's not a lot of options, but amongst them, they're working to price fix, and they're working to collude on ensuring that the products are available at a certain price so that they benefit even if the consumers do not. Let's talk about some of those anti-competitive strategies that we're going to see with oligopolies and monopolies to some extent. So in oligopolistic competition, you might see companies creating new monopolies. For example, if they have a monopoly in one market, they're going to use that power to create monopolies in another market. And so they start to then consolidate their power and their profitability. In terms of driving prices and supply and things like that. The price fixing, which I've already alluded to, where the oligopolistic companies, that minority of companies that are controlling the market, are colluding on price fixing. They manipulate the supply, so they decide how much is going to be out there. We know that this happens in the oil market, that the oil-producing countries, South America, Venezuela, in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, et cetera, Kuwait, they collude in price fixing. and deciding how much supply is out there so that they can control, what's going on in international power, in international relations. It's why we've been trying to negotiate with Saudi Arabia to increase the supply of oil so that we can bring gas prices down a little bit. It's still a little high. I mean, they're much better than they were, but they're still pretty high. Market allocations, where companies in an oligopoly divide up the market themselves. I'll take this, you take this, they take that, and they divide the market up in a way that serves them, not necessarily serving the customer. Then there's bid rigging, where they agree in advance who's going to submit a bid and who is going to win, and everything is just sort of pro forma. Exclusive deal arrangements, where a retailer is not allowed to buy from a firm unless it agrees to not purchase from a competitor. So we will only do business with you if you only buy from us and you don't buy from them. And people should have the right to freely buy and sell from whomever they want. And that's the problem with exclusive deal arrangements. That is anti-competitive strategies. Tying arrangements, where a firm won't sell to a buyer unless the buyer agrees to buy goods from their firm, whatever the goods are. Let's say you've got a company that is very diversified in terms of their portfolio. They offer a lot of different products and services out there, and you might be buying products here, but you also have to buy products, all of their products from the other business units that they've got going on in order to be able to buy from them. So that you're like, we'll sell to you these products, but you also have to buy these products in these other divisions as well if you're going to buy products at all. You don't get to buy from a whole bunch of people. We are only going to control you buying with us. So that's a tying arrangement. I don't get to buy products that are not necessarily related to this deal from anybody else. I have to buy all my products from this company as much as is feasible based on what they offer. Then there's retail price maintenance. A manufacturer sells to retailers only if the retailers agree to charge a set price for that good. So the goal is you have to set the price here, otherwise I'm not going to sell to you. Predatory price discrimination, where the seller charges different prices to different buyers for the same good. So, in this market, I'm going to charge more. In this market, I charge less. And we might see this in situations where there is redlining in communities where there's ethnic minority groups in one area of a city than another. Prices will be higher in some areas than others, and that's because there's predatory price discrimination. So I will charge you more because you're in this neighborhood, and I'll charge you less because you're in a nicer neighborhood. And then, of course, there's bribery, where a firm shuts out competitors by paying off the government officials to purchase goods only from that firm. So briberies is a big part of that, and we will probably get into the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which tells us that we're not allowed to engage in bribery when we're doing business with foreign businesses overseas, even if it's a norm. We talk about ethical relativism, right? Even if it's a norm in another country to use bribes to get products and services bought and sold, it's illegal here in the United States, and so we have to be held to our standards. And if we're found to be engaged in bribing, that can come back to hurt us. So public policy has tried to step in to deal with monopolies and oligopolies. And the Sherman Antitrust Act, which still is held today, passed by Congress in 1890, was designed to combat the anti-competitive practices of what we called euphemistically the robber barons, the Rockefellers, the J.P. Morgans, the Vanderbilts, all of these entrepreneurs who try to use anti-competitive practices to control the marketplace. And so anybody who says, oh, we should go back to the time when we didn't have regulations, this is what happened when there weren't any regulations. We had people like John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan and others that controlled all of the marketplace. They owned everything. And that's obviously at issue. The two most significant sections of the Sherman Antitrust Act: number one, every contract, combination, or conspiracy in restraint of trade or commerce among the several states or with foreign nations is declared illegal, number one. And number two, every person who shall monopolize or attempt to monopolize or combine or conspire with any other person or persons to monopolize any part of the trade or commerce among the several states or with foreign nations shall be deemed guilty of a felony. So it is a felony charge if you are engaging in antitrust or anti-trade, anti-competitive behaviors. So there are three main points of view on oligopoly power and what should be done about it. Obviously, the first approach is we don't do anything. That there are some benefits to it, so therefore, just let them do their thing, and they will control the world, and we don't do anything about it. The number two option is the antitrust view. And in that antitrust view, it's like, nope, we got to break them up and we got to tear them apart to break them down into smaller businesses so that competition can occur. The third option, the regulation point of view, says, well, there are some good things that can happen for oligopoly powers. They can have economies of scale that brings down prices to some extent. But then what we need to do in the regulation point of view is government needs to step in to regulate it. So yes, okay, we can let them do that, but we can't let them set the prices to be unrealistically high, et cetera, et cetera. And so the perspective one says we wash our hands, we don't do anything. Perspective two says break them up. Perspective three says, well, we'll let them stay, but we'll manage them and control them so that they don't price gouge and various other things. And there's pros and cons, of course, to all of these perspectives, but nonetheless, there are the major point of view is kind of depends on what works for you. I mean, obviously, everybody's going to have a different perspective on this. I'm a firm believer in fairness for everybody, so I believe in either the antitrust view or the regulation point of view. I don't believe in doing nothing because that is harmful to me as the consumer. And when we allow companies to get away with that as a business professor, I struggle with that tremendously.